I'm Eileen Jacobson, and I was born in Shanghai, July 21st, 1947. My parents met each other during an air raid. My father lived in the same lane as my mother, it turned out, and he had noticed her. So he got himself a spot right next to her.
I was born in 42, and by that time we were under Japanese occupation. My family was very active in the Jewish club. Mm-hmm. My father was on the board, and they were very involved in helping deal with the refugees, both in terms of providing housing where it could be found, feeding the people. My memories of Shanghai, I remember that my crib was moved into the hallway. And it was moved into the hallway to avoid the bombing. And I have this vivid image of my mother shouting at my father, saying, "No, don't go in there," because he wanted to go into their bedroom. And all the windows had been taped, crisscrossed with tape, and she was afraid that he would get hurt. So these are my memories of Shanghai at that time.
In Shanghai, 15,000 wanderers, half-starved, homeless, sick, in daily fear of an epidemic, living in conditions made more dreadful by the fighting around Shanghai, are beseeching America for a hospital, medical services, and supplies to maintain life.
My parents came here with my brother and sister from Shanghai in 1949. They had left Germany in 1938. My father was a pharmacist. In Shanghai, he could not, he really worked out of a warehouse and supplied other refugee doctors and other doctors, some of the Russian doctors, with medications. They did all right for themselves. My brother went to school. He went to a Christian school, the Francis Xavier College, and my sister was a child, grew up on the lane speaking Chinese with the other Chinese children, and I grew up on those stories.
I'm Lily Langotsky, and I was born in Shanghai. My father was born in Chita in Siberia. My grandfather had a gold mine.
Wow.
Which we no longer have. And the Bolsheviks came in to Siberia, and my father had 9 siblings, and they had a huge house which looked very much like the Hermitage. It's a big yellow house with apparently a glass staircase, like the Apple Store, in 1910. So that was confiscated by the Bolsheviks. And my grandfather, who was then in his 80s, told all the children, 10 children, to leave. My mother was born in northern China, in Harbin. When the Chinese occupation of Manchuria, they left, and she went to Shanghai to study art. And it was probably 31 or 32 when she came to Shanghai. And she met my father in 1940. And they had a very good life. They had a lot of friends. We lived in the French concession. It was, a lot of the Russian Jews who were there, who were a very close-knit community. And they had a good life.
This gets at the heart of this whole, the sort of incredible nature of this whole story, that any of this happened in the first place, that people were given visas to escape, that your relatives wound up in Siberia and then in northern China. Like, it is a crazy amount of people just extending themselves out of the generosity of their own heart and the idea of giving other people a place to live. I wonder, did any of your relatives talk about the process of getting a visa, particularly to go to Shanghai, or to get out, rather, of Europe?
Yeah, they had to show to the Gestapo, the Nazi Gestapo, here's Polizeipräsident, that they were upright citizens and were allowed to leave the country.
Again, this question of why Shanghai, and Shanghai was an international port. it was run by various Western governments for a time, and that sort of created this idea of the open port. Can you explain that to us a little bit?
Well, in history, the Shanghai was kind of like a mosaic, divided into several parts and controlled by French, that's called a French concession, international settlement by the US and Britain, and including the Hongqiu and occupied by the Japanese.
And Hongqiu is a neighborhood
it's the
in
neighborhood.
Shanghai.
Yes.
This is where the Jews ended up.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah. So it created opportunities for the refugees to come without the entry permit.
It's an amazing history of this very unique open port situation. Everyone has a different story. I mean, we've been learning so much from our Shanghai survivors. One of the New York Philharmonic musicians, who has since passed, but his name was Peter Simonauer, our associate principal clarinet. His father was German Jew in Berlin, was actually taken to a concentration camp in 1937. His wife was not. His wife found him a job in a band, and they actually let him out, and the family went to China. And his son, Peter Simonauer, learned the clarinet in Shanghai. He studied music there. After World War II, in the late 40s, they moved to Israel, and in 1959, I think, Leonard Bernstein hired him as a clarinetist in the New York Philharmonic, and the family came to New York. So these kinds of stories, I mean, are just amazing.
So my family story is a little bit different in that I'm here representing my Chinese family. I wish my dad were here. He was originally connected to the group, but he had passed away since we had first met each other. My dad lived in Shanghai. He's Chinese. And my family story is really about how a German Jewish refugee married into our Chinese family and the reverberating impact that had. The German Jewish refugee that came into our family was a gentleman by the name of Ernst Emanuel Kahlenberg. There was an international amateur radio association, and radio was becoming really big in China. And he decided to be a radio announcer. So he used a pseudonym under the name of Hans Müller, and he broadcast the German news in German. And his office was in a building that was right around the corner from the Shanghai telephone. And that's how he met his lifelong Chinese friend, my dad's uncle Sherman. And Sherman introduced him to, obviously, his wife Elsie and Elsie's single sister Hilda. And Hilda and Ernst fell in love, and they ended up marrying in 1941. In 1943, they rounded up all of the German Jewish refugees and put them in ghettos. Not Ernst. He hid with his wife. At the time, they also had a child. And they hid with Sherman and Elsie in their home. And it was at great risk to them because they lived just across the border from the French concession, the Chinese neighborhood. The Chinese were obviously under the oppression of the Japanese. The Japanese soldiers did come knocking, and they lied, and they gave him safe harbor during a time when everybody was rounded up. So it was an act of just kindness and otherwise that he never forgot. So I think there was a lot of mention about the Chinese at the time. I mean, there were, as many Jewish refugees, there were Chinese refugees. The city was, there was struggles in both groups, but both groups had a lot of mutual empathy for each other because they were in the same circumstance. The outpouring between the two communities was very strong.
I know you know from Gabe, who told you the plot of the piece last time, but they're at the center of the story, or one half of the story really is a love affair between a Jewish doctor who comes from Germany and a Chinese daughter of the pharmacist. the idea of this whole piece really is to tell this story that I didn't even know. I have a couple Holocaust people who were killed in the Holocaust and then some who survived in my family, but barely even knew about that. And this history is so fascinating because of all the nuances and layers of class, as you said, and also just Jewishness and Chineseness. It's so subtle. And I love that all of you come from slightly different vantage points with it too. It's fascinating.